personal, mental challenge as well as a professional challenge when I was like having my career and suddenly our that time country Yugoslavia was falling apart because of the political situation. And in the late 1980s, Europe was actually divided into two parts, basically. One was the so-called Western democratic part, and the other, the Eastern one, was one-party system, mostly communist countries. And my former country, Yugoslavia, was something in between. And there is even a movie about this. So we were still having one-party system, which was a communist party, but we were free to travel unlike other countries' people, and we had a kind of opportunity to elect our representatives from the group of people we were presented. So in the mid-80s, there was a kind of movement in Europe, maybe somebody of you heard, like Solidarność in Poland, but also other countries, and in our part of Yugoslavia, which is Slovenia, we had very strong cultural movement, and this is actually the beginning of the modern statehood of Slovenia. Although I have to say the people of Slovenia have lived in this area since 7th century. We had also a kind of statehood between 7th and 10th century, but we were always part of some other countries, either Austro-Hungarian Empire, or former Yugoslavia, or Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, and so on. So it was an important time that when there was opportunity that people of Slovenia and the leaders of that time country were aware that we got the historic opportunity to declare our independence. This was not just something we got in a short time, because the language of Slovenian people was there for many years. So one of the main elements that defines us was the language, and they were at that time about 2 million people. Before that we were even less, and we were able to survive among the strong nations like the Germans in the north, the Italians in the west, and also Hungarians in the east, because the people somehow kept their culture within the small communities where we were. At that time, the big cities were basically speaking foreign languages, but Slovenian language was kept since 7th century. We got our first book in 1550, and all this came together in the late 1980s when Europe was on a way to a big political change. I believe you heard about the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, and this was a kind of a strong signal to other nations who were not independent before. And they were others, not just Slovenia and the other nations of former Yugoslavia, but also Czechs and Slovaks. And we know that there are other nations in Europe as well who are still part of bigger countries. So at that time the political climate was just right, because people were ready for a multi-party system which we didn't have before, and we were also having our politicians who found the way. It was not just that we declared the independence after the political situation was right. It was also very important to find the proper way to persuade the international community how they can actually accept a new country in Europe, because nobody really likes big political disturbances. Stability is kind of something we all would like to keep. So the people were actually asked for deciding as either we want to stay with the old former Yugoslavia or we want to risk and go into a new country. So we had a referendum, and the referendum was widely supportive to the new statehood. So we got the decision of the people, but this was not actually enough, because that was the beginning that the government had to start to discuss how we will be internationally recognized. And this was also the part when I entered the Foreign Service, because before I was a high school teacher and a researcher, and suddenly the politicians were looking people with experience. So I had some international experience traveling to different continents, and I did my studies. So this was the new opportunity also in a personal way that everybody was able to contribute to the new country, not just like diplomats, but also artists, politicians, and other people. And it was a kind of very unique mood within the society at that time, because we had so many opportunities. We had so many creative people who were ready to do something for a new country, and we also had a very big risk. And of course, this risk came to our minds in June 1991, when we actually declared the independence, half a year after the referendum was held. And at that time, Federal Army and people of the Federal Army and the federal government did not agree with the independence, so there was an invasion that started in Slovenia with tanks on the streets, which was, at least for me and most of the people, a big surprise. We had quite a normal, peaceful life, and nobody actually believed that tanks can come to the streets and start killing people. And this is what happened. So this was a very important period. It was 10 days, so the war was short, but very important for the politicians that they found a mutual agreement with other federal politicians to let Slovenia go as independent country. And this was kind of a challenging period also because the leaders had to test the mood within the society, whether people are supporting them in their goal or not. And what happened is actually that each local community was organized into a rebellion. So people were blocking the streets with concrete, with cars, buses, and many other obstacles, so that the tanks and the army trucks were not able to move. They were cutting off electricity from the barracks and water, so that the soldiers would be able to go out without fight. This was the offer. And the 10 days war was actually, in a way, a proof that politics and diplomacy can work, because this war could be much longer, as it was the case in other parts of former Yugoslavia, Croatia, for example, Bosnia and Herzegovina, or Kosovo. But for us, this was it. And then the next step was, of course, to establish the statehood. We had the old constitution of former Yugoslavia. We had the old national anthem. We had all the old state symbols. We started to invent new symbols. And this is why I brought some of the pictures to show to you, and they're actually artists who are creating this. Like in Canada, you have people who draw the money. So we had people who draw ID cards, passports, or other ID documents, and the money. So we can see different drawings, and then we have post stamps and the coins as well. So this is all what we had to introduce in a very short time. And we also had to approve the new national anthem, which is actually a very nice one. The lyrics are cheering all the nations who love freedom, not just our own, which usually the anthem is, which it's normal, but so everybody who loves freedom and democracy and friendly relations. So this is one of the main messages of our national anthem. We started to establish relations with foreign countries, and I was already part of the foreign service when I left with at that time my deputy foreign minister to African countries, which heard about the new country in Europe, but they didn't know who we are. So we went to a few of them, and some they did not want to receive us because they were not sure whether they are ready to go with the new country or not. So we were at some spots where we were not able to start normal discussions about recognition of Slovenia. But anyway, the process somehow became irreversible. We were recognized by major powers and also by Vatican, which has a kind of strong word among the Christian world. We were slowly approaching the membership of the United Nations, which was one of the major steps forward. And this was something which is a kind of very special experience, because the older countries have all this as something very normal, but we were actually struggling for each step, one by one. Once we became a well-established independent country, we had to define our future orientation. And luckily, at that time, European Union was an association that was actually supporting countries that were introducing democratic systems and market economy to develop faster and also to join this association. So Slovenia had two goals. One was, of course, the European Union, and the other was also defense, because we were a small, tiny country of 2 million people. And if you look at the map of Europe, this is such a small spot that it's hardly recognizable. So from the defensive point of view, it was important that we also joined the alliance, which Canada is also part of. It's NATO, and these were two important steps that actually meant recognition of our international community membership. And the rest was actually much easier. We were starting to open the foreign representative offices and embassies, one in Canada in 1993, and we started to operate as a normal country. And what I would like to say is that Slovenia, as a relatively new country, had actually seized the opportunity, a small window in like almost 1500 years of history, to establish its statehood, and the people actually were able to fulfill their dreams. And one of the major elements that kept our nation alive until we were able to declare our independence was our culture and our language. So this is very important for any nation, and for Slovenia, I think, specifically as well. And the last thing is also that people were ready to accept the new circumstances and to support their individual new country.